the criminals coming from Europe, arriving on the island of Haiti. That's the name of the entire island. That's what the Arawak people called it. And this for thousands of years before the criminals arrived from Europe. And when they arrive, they find the people there. It is estimated there were between 2 and 3.5 million Arawaks on the island in 1492. 11 years later, it was estimated less than 100,000 people were living on this island.
What really happened to the Arawaks? Can we ever truly grasp the depth of their suffering and the weight of their loss? Once vibrant and thriving, these indigenous people were the first to greet Christopher Columbus in 1492. They were a people rich in culture, community, and connection to the land. Their laughter filled the air, their crafts adorned the shores, and their spirits danced with the rhythms of nature. Yet, as the sails of European ships appeared on the horizon, a dark chapter began to unfold. The arrival of colonizers marked the beginning of a devastating transformation, one that would lead to the near annihilation of a civilization.
A little before this estimate, as they noticed that the people were just dropping off like flies, the Europeans went to Jamaica, collected a portion of the population there, brought them to Haiti to dig for gold for them. And that population disappeared too. They went to Puerto Rico and brought boatloads of Arawak and Tainos and Caribs. And that population disappeared too in Haiti.
The Arawaks, who welcomed these strangers with open arms, soon found themselves ensnared in a web of exploitation, violence, and disease. Their vibrant and thriving world shattered, leaving behind echoes of their existence and their lives forever altered by the tides of history. Now, how did a vibrant civilization, rich in culture and community, become a mere whisper in the annals of time? What did it feel like to witness the arrival of ships on the horizon, to see the faces of strangers who would bring both wonder and devastation? And how did it feel to watch as their homes were transformed into battlegrounds, their families torn apart by the insatiable hunger for power and resources? In seeking answers, we'll embark on a journey not just through time, but into the very heart of humanity, where compassion, loss, and resilience intertwine in a narrative that demands to be told. Before we proceed with this touching story, do not forget to support our efforts by hitting that like button before you. Share with your family and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay tuned in for more informative stories ahead. Now brace yourselves. Let us embark on a journey into the very dark chapters of time.
We are told this whole process is supposed to be a civilizing process. We are told the Arawaks were savages. We are told, in some cases they even say they were, what's the word they like to say when you eat people? No, cannibals. Cannibals. They were cannibals. But you know, these Arawaks were living there for thousands of years and multiplying. 3.5 million people eliminated in less than 11 years. A few Europeans came. The Europeans were never more than a few thousand on the island. If we had 3.5 million cannibals on an island, and a few thousand Europeans came, and after 11 years, the cannibals were all dead, and the civilizers were still there. Is there something wrong with this information? Something very wrong. Very, very wrong there.
Indeed, yes. Very, very wrong. The Caribbean was inhabited long before Christopher Columbus set foot in the Bahamas, and the inhabitants were the Arawaks. The Arawaks were the first people to live in the Caribbean islands and parts of South America. They were also the first to be seen by Columbus and his men. Their name, pronounced Arawak, refers to their main crop, cassava root. The Arawak are a group of indigenous peoples of northern South America and of the Caribbean. The term Arawak has been applied at various times to different indigenous groups, from the Locono of South America to the Taino, who lived in the Caribbean, Greater Antilles, and Northern Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean. They migrated from the eastern slopes of the Andes to the Amazon River into the Orinoco Valley, Venezuela, and Colombia. From there, they went out into the Antilles and perhaps even to the Florida Keys. They were superb navigators of the sea. The name Arawak also refers to a number of indigenous peoples who spoke a similar language but lacked cultural or racial cohesiveness. This linguistic heritage was shared by the warlike and cannibalistic Carib, who lived in the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean and in northern South America. However, Europeans used the term Arawak to describe any Indian people who were not hostile to them, while they used the term Carib to describe any Indian people who were hostile to them. The correct term for the Arawak would have been Locono or Locono. The Locono lived in what became Venezuela and called their homeland Aracawi. As a matter of fact, the original Arawak came from northern South America and were forced out of the area by hostile tribes. They reached the Greater Antilles around 300 CE. So because all the tribes in the Caribbean and northern South America had a common linguistic heritage, linguists prefer to call all these Indians Arawak. When they were first encountered by Europeans, the Taino practiced a high-yielding form of shifting agriculture to grow their staple foods, cassava and yams. They would burn the forest or scrub and then heap the ashes and soil into mounds that could be easily planted, tended, and irrigated. Corn, maize, beans, squash, tobacco, peanuts, groundnuts, and peppers were also grown, and wild plants were gathered. Birds, lizards, and small animals were hunted for food, the only domesticated animals being dogs, and occasionally parrots used to decoy wild birds within range of hunters. Fish and shellfish were another important food source. Traditional Taino settlements ranged from small family compounds to groups of 3,000 people. Houses were built of logs and poles with thatched roofs. Men wore loincloths and women wore aprons of cotton or palm fibers. Both sexes painted themselves on special occasions, and they wore earrings, nose rings, and necklaces, which were sometimes made of gold. The Taino also made pottery, baskets, and implements of stone and wood. From trees they made bowls, chairs, baskets, and agricultural and hunting tools. While Arawak women worked, men lounged in hammocks, which were later adopted by European sailors as a more suitable option for bedding than the flea-infested straw they used. The Arawak also practiced rigorous hygienic practices, like frequent bathing, believing that sweat was bad for the soul. A favorite form of recreation was a ball game played on rectangular courts. The Taino had an elaborate system of religious beliefs and rituals that involved the worship of spirits, zimis, by means of carved representations. They also had a complex social order, with a government of hereditary chiefs and sub-chiefs and classes of nobles, commoners, and slaves. Their leaders were caciques, or kings, who ruled with absolute power. The caciques had numerous privileges, such as living in special houses, eating certain foods, and receiving special treatment from the groups below them. In the matrilineal Arawak society, rank was inherited through a female line, which meant that a king was succeeded by his eldest sister's eldest son. The caciques ruled over a stratified society in which slaves known as naborias made up the lowest tier. In addition to the slaves and the caciques, there were commoners and nobles known as nitainos. The Arawak praised and respected not only their caciques, but also their priests and medicine men. They believed strongly in the power of nature during and after death. Also, the Arawaks revered local wildlife such as deer, dogs, frogs, turtles, and birds. They believed that the soul survived in the trees, rivers, and the rest of the surrounding environment, and they celebrated the beauty of the stars in the heavens. Unfortunately, the Taino were easily conquered by the Spaniards beginning in 1493. Enslavement, starvation, and disease reduced them to a few thousand by 1520 and to near extinction by 1550. Columbus's men and the Spaniards who followed them treated the Arawak harshly. They forced them to work in fields and in mines. Some Arawak died of starvation, while many others died of diseases brought by the Europeans. Those who survived mixed with Spaniards, Africans, and others, but Taino culture was largely wiped out. How did this happen? Let's journey down history to find out. Spain was recently unified as one of the new modern nation-states, like France, England, and Portugal. Its population, mostly poor peasants, worked for the nobility, who were 2% of the population and owned 95% of the land. Spain had tied itself to the Catholic Church, expelled all the Jews and driven out the Moors. And like other states of the modern world, Spain sought gold, which was becoming the new mark of wealth. It was even more useful than land because it could buy anything. There was gold in Asia, it was thought, and certainly silks and spices, for Marco Polo and others had brought back marvelous things from their overland expeditions centuries before. Now that the Turks had conquered Constantinople and the eastern Mediterranean and controlled the land routes to Asia, a sea route was needed. Portuguese sailors were working their way around the southern tip of Africa. Spain decided to gamble on a long sail across an unknown ocean. So, on April 17, 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs of Castile, signed the capitulations of Santa Fe, the agreement by which Christopher Columbus, one-time wool-weaving apprentice in Savona, Italy, undertook a voyage of discovery to the western Atlantic. In return for bringing back gold and spices, they promised Columbus 10% of the profits, governorship over newfound lands, and the fame that would go with a new title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea. He set out with 3 sailing ships, the largest of which was the Santa Maria, perhaps 100 feet long, and 39 crew members. Imagining a smaller world, Columbus would never have made it to Asia, which was thousands of miles farther away than he had calculated. He would have been doomed by that great expanse of sea, but he was lucky. 1/4 of the way, there he came upon an unknown, uncharted land that lay between Europe and Asia, the Americas. It was early October 1492, and 33 days since he and his crew had left the Canary Islands, off the Atlantic coast of Africa. Now they saw branches and sticks floating in the water. They saw flocks of birds. These were signs of land. Then, on October 12th, a sailor called Rodrigo saw the early morning moon shining on white sands and cried out. It was an island in the Bahamas, the Caribbean Sea. According to agreement, the first man to sight land was supposed to get a yearly pension of 10,000 maravedis for life, but Rodrigo never got it. Columbus claimed he had seen a light the evening before, and he got the reward instead. What a crook. So, approaching land, they were met by the Arawak Indians, who swam out to greet them. The Arawak men and women, naked, tawny, and full of wonder, emerged from their villages onto the island's beaches and swam out to get a closer look at the strange big boat. When Columbus and his sailors came ashore, carrying swords, speaking oddly, the Arawaks ran to greet them, bringing them food, water, and gifts. Columbus later described them in his letters back to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain as docile and could be easily made to comply and yield to any demand from Spain. It read thus, "They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk's bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them. For I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." These Arawaks of the Bahama Islands were much like Indians on the mainland, who were remarkable for their hospitality, their belief in sharing. These traits did not stand out in the Europe of the Renaissance, dominated as it was by the religion of popes, the government of kings, the frenzy for money that marked Western civilization and its first messenger to the Americas, Christopher Columbus. Columbus also wrote, "As soon as I arrived in the Indies, on the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts." The Arawaks lived in village communes and had a developed agriculture of corn, yams, cassava, could spin and weave, but they had no horses or work animals. They had no iron, but they wore tiny gold ornaments in their ears. This was to have enormous consequences, as it led Columbus to take some of them aboard ship as prisoners because he insisted that they guide him to the source of the gold. At this time, the information Columbus wanted most was, where is the gold? He then sailed to what is now Cuba, then to Hispaniola, that is the island which today consists of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There, bits of visible gold in the rivers and a gold mask presented to Columbus by a local Indian chief led to wild visions of gold fields. This was a fundamental milestone for Christopher Columbus to formally initiate the discovery of America and thus inaugurate a commercial route through the Atlantic that would allow Spain to launch new expeditions in search of new lands. On Hispaniola, out of timbers from the Santa Maria, which had run aground, Columbus built a fort, the first European military base in the Western Hemisphere. He called it Navidad, Christmas, and left 39 crew members there, with instructions to find and store the gold. He took more Indian prisoners and put them aboard his 2 remaining ships. At one part of the island, he got into a fight with Indians who refused to trade as many bows and arrows as he and his men wanted. 2 were run through with swords and bled to death. Then Nina and Pinta, that is Columbus's 2 remaining ships, set sail for the Azores in Spain. When the weather turned cold, the Indian prisoners began to die. Columbus's report to the court in Madrid was extravagant. He insisted he had reached Asia, even though it was Cuba, and an island off the coast of China, which is Hispaniola. His descriptions were part fact, part fiction, as he reported thus.
Hispaniola is a miracle. Mountains and hills, plains and pastures are both fertile and beautiful. The harbors are unbelievably good, and there are many wide rivers of which the majority contain gold. There are many spices and great mines of gold and other metals. The Indians are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it. When you ask for something they have, they never say no. On the contrary, they offer to share with anyone.
He concluded his report by asking for a little help from their majesties, and in return, he would bring them from his next voyage as much gold as they need and as many slaves as they ask. He was full of religious talk. Thus the eternal God, our Lord, gives victory to those who follow his way over apparent impossibilities. Because of Columbus's exaggerated report and promises, his second expedition was given 17 ships and more than 1,200 men. The aim was clear: slaves and gold. They went from island to island in the Caribbean, taking Indians as captives. But as word spread of the Europeans' intent, they found more and more empty villages. However, as more Spanish arrived in the Caribbean and in South America, more carriers of smallpox and measles descended on the native population, who possessed no natural defenses against these diseases. Epidemics killed hundreds of thousands, decimating populations of Arawak in Hispaniola and in South America. In Haiti, the Europeans found that the sailors left behind at Fort Navidad had been killed in a battle with the Indians after they had roamed the island in gangs looking for gold, taking women and children as slaves for sex and labor. Now, from his base on Haiti, Columbus sent expedition after expedition into the interior. They found no gold fields, but had to fill up the ships returning to Spain with some kind of dividend. So, in the year 1495, they went on a great slave raid, rounded up 1,500 Arawak men, women, and children, put them in pens guarded by Spaniards and dogs, then picked the 500 best specimens to load onto ships. Of those 500, 200 died en route. The rest arrived alive in Spain and were put up for sale by the archdeacon of the town, who reported that, although the slaves were naked as the day they were born, they showed no more embarrassment than animals. Columbus later wrote, "Let us, in the name of the Holy Trinity, go on sending all the slaves that can be sold." but too many of the slaves died in captivity, and so Columbus, desperate to pay back dividends to those who had invested, had to make good his promise to fill the ships with gold. So in the province of Sicao in Haiti, where he and his men imagined huge gold fields to exist, they ordered all persons 14 years or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given copper tokens to hang around their necks. Indians who were found without a copper token had their hands cut off and bled to death. Washington Irving, an American short story writer, essayist, biographer, historian, and diplomat of the early 19th century, from whose pen came the most eloquent account of the plight of the unhappy islanders, wrote,
"In this way was the yoke of servitude fixed upon the island and its thraldom effectively ensured. Deep despair now fell on the natives when they found a perpetual task inflicted upon them. Weak and indolent by nature, unused to labor of any kind and brought up in the untasked idleness of their soft climate and their fruitful groves, death itself seemed preferable to a life of toil and anxiety. They saw no end to this harassing evil which had so suddenly fallen upon them. No prospect of a return to that roving independence and ample leisure so dear to the wild inhabitants of the forest. The pleasant life of the island was at an end. They were now obliged to grope day by day with bending body and anxious eye along the borders of their rivers, sifting the sands for the grains of gold which every day grew more scanty, or to labor in the fields beneath the fervor of a tropical sun to raise food for their taskmasters, or to produce the vegetable tribute imposed upon them. They sank to sleep weary and exhausted at night, with the certainty that the next day was to be a repetition of the same toil and suffering.
Sadly, the natives were given an impossible task. The only gold around was bits of dust garnered from the streams. So when they couldn't find any gold, the natives ran from the Spaniard sailors, but the sailors sent the dogs after the Arawak tribe and brutally killed many of them. However, in a bid to put together an army of resistance, the Arawaks faced Spaniards who had armor, muskets, swords, and horses. When the Spaniards took prisoners, they hanged them or burned them to death. Among the Arawaks, mass suicides began, with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. In 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the 250,000 Indians on Haiti were dead. When it became clear that there was no gold left, the Indians were taken as slave labor on huge estates, known later as encomiendas. They worked at a ferocious pace and died by the thousands. Bartolomé de las Casas, a young priest, witnessed many atrocities committed by Spaniards against native peoples. He later wrote, "I saw here cruelty on a scale no living being has ever seen or expected to see." Las Casas describes the treatment of natives thus:
"Our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. Small wonder then if they tried to kill one of us now and then. The admiral, it is true, was blind as those who came after him, and he was so anxious to please the king that he committed irreparable crimes against the Indians."
Las Casas also notes that the Spaniards thought nothing of knifing Indians by 10s and 20s and of cutting slices off them to test the sharpness of their blades. By the year 1515, there were perhaps 50,000 Indians left, and by 1550, they were reduced to 500. A report of the year 1650 shows none of the original Arawaks or their descendants left on the island. Fortunately, the chief source, and on many matters the only source, of information about what happened on the islands after Columbus came, is Bartolomé de las Casas, who, as a young priest, participated in the conquest of Cuba. For a time, he owned a plantation on which Indian slaves worked, but he gave that up and became a vehement critic of Spanish cruelty. Las Casas transcribed Columbus's journal, and in his 50s began a multi-volume history of the Indies. In it, he describes the Indians. They are agile, he says, and can swim long distances, especially the women. They are not completely peaceful, because they do battle from time to time with other tribes, but their casualties seem small, and they fight when they are individually moved to do so because of some grievance, not on the orders of captains or kings. Also, in Book 2 of his History of the Indies, Las Casas, who at first urged replacing Indians by black slaves, thinking they were stronger and would survive, but later relented when he saw the effects on blacks, tells about the treatment of the Indians by the Spaniards. It is a unique account and deserves to be quoted at length. It reads, "Endless testimonies prove the mild and pacific temperament of the natives, but our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. Small wonder, then, if they tried to kill one of us now and then. The admiral, it is true, was blind as those who came after him, and he was so anxious to please the king that he committed irreparable crimes against the Indians." Las Casas further tells how the Spaniards grew more conceited every day, and after a while refused to walk any distance.
They rode the backs of Indians if they were in a hurry or were carried on hammocks by Indians running in relays. In this case, they also had Indians carry large leaves to shade them from the sun and others to fan them with goose wings.
Total control led to total cruelty. The Spaniards thought nothing of knifing Indians by 10s and 20s and of cutting slices off them to test the sharpness of their blades. Las Casas tells how 2 of these so-called Christians met 2 Indian boys one day, each carrying a parrot. They took the parrots and, for fun, beheaded the boys. The Indians' attempts to defend themselves failed, and when they ran off into the hills, they were found and killed, so Las Casas reports. They suffered and died in the mines, and others labored in desperate silence, knowing not a soul in the world to whom they could turn for help. He further describes their work in the mines as thus:
Mountains are stripped from top to bottom and bottom to top 1,000 times. They dig, split rocks, move stones, and carry dirt on their backs to wash it in the rivers, while those who wash gold stay in the water all the time with their backs bent so constantly it breaks them. And when water invades the mines, the most arduous task of all is to dry the mines by scooping up pans full of water and throwing it up outside. After each 6 or 8 months' work in the mines, which was the time required of each crew to dig enough gold for melting, up to 1/3 of the men died.
While the men were sent many miles away to the mines, their wives remained to work the soil, forced into the excruciating job of digging and making thousands of hills for cassava plants. Thus, husbands and wives were together only once every 8 or 10 months, and when they met, they were so exhausted and depressed on both sides, they ceased to procreate. As for the newly born, they died early because their mothers, overworked and famished, had no milk to nurse them.
And for this reason,
He further wrote,
while I was in Cuba, 7,000 children died in 3 months. Some mothers even drowned their babies from sheer desperation. In this way, husbands died in the mines, wives died at work, and children died from lack of milk. And in a short time this land, which was so great, so powerful and fertile, was depopulated. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature, and now I tremble as I write.
When he arrived on Hispaniola in 1508, Las Casas says,
There were 60,000 people living on this island, including the Indians, so that from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. Who in future generations will believe this? I myself, writing it as a knowledgeable eyewitness, can hardly believe it.
It is believed that when Columbus arrived in Hispaniola in the 1490s, there were millions of Arawak who greeted him and his crew with gifts of trade and welcome. By the 1530s, around 85% of them were dead. Many of the Spanish men raped and or married Arawak women, leading to a new race of natives called mestizos, which, even into the 21st century, is an ethnic group of mixed European and native heritage. These mixed-race offspring also intermarried with African slaves as they began being transported to the West Indies and to South America in the 1600s. Today, the mixed-race, Arawak, Spanish, African, descendants of the Arawak and Taino tribe can be seen in Guyana, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. Also, several groups claiming Taino descent gained visibility in the late 20th century, notably in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. state of Florida. In 1998, the United Confederation of Taino People, which characterizes itself as an intertribal authority, was created as an umbrella organization for the affirmation and restoration of Taino culture, language, and religion. Whereas the Taino are not officially recognized as a group by any governments, those who consider themselves Taino claim the right to self-determination. Now, many may see Christopher Columbus as a hero, but is he really one? The sad truth is, he is nowhere near a hero. Columbus could be considered as a villain of some sort. His sin against the natives, whose only crime was a peaceful acceptance of him and his crew members, was a grave one. He committed genocide upon the Arawak Native Americans. Though many Arawaks were decimated, their descendants continue to exist, preserving elements of their culture and identity. The legacy of the Arawaks can be seen in the cultural practices, languages, and traditions of contemporary Caribbean societies. Therefore, in a world still grappling with the repercussions of colonialism, the story of the Arawaks invites us to engage in a deeper dialogue about identity, heritage, and the ongoing struggles for recognition and justice faced by indigenous populations today. In conclusion, what happened to the Arawaks is not just a historical account of tragedy. It is a call to reflect on the complexities of human interaction, the consequences of our actions, and the enduring spirit of those who resist erasure. It challenges us to confront the legacies of colonialism and to strive for a future where the voices of indigenous peoples are heard, respected, and celebrated. The Arawaks remind us that while history may be marked by suffering, it is also filled with the potential for healing, understanding, and reconciliation. That brings us to the end of yet another interesting video segment. Did you happen to learn a thing or two? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. We are always delighted to pick from your thoughts. Also, support our works by hitting that like button in front of you. Share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay tuned in always. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.